make any further comment or remark?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Divino. As I've mentioned at the beginning, that the theme of the conference is the reform of the UN Charter. Before you ask question to Mr. Divino, I would like to again make a few comments. The first comment being that all member states of the United Nations have acceded to the United Nations Charter. The Charter outlines the procedure of the operations of the United Nations. As I've mentioned, all member states are represented at the United Nations Assembly. And when it comes to voting, each member state has one vote. There are suggestions that the voting system should be changed to align with the population of that particular member state. Some member states are smaller. Some member states like India are huge with a very, very large population. Now, the suggestion which is being circulated is that member states with a bigger population should be given more than one vote. That is still a suggestion which has to be presented to the General Assembly. There are also suggestions of the establishment of a world parliament. Now, at 3:30, Chief Justices will meet and come up with a resolution. And certainly one of the resolutions is that the voting system of the General Assembly should be reconsidered to give more votes to member states with a bigger population. There is also a resolution which will be calling for the establishment of a world parliament. A world parliament that will have two chambers. The first chamber being the representative of all the member states, and the second chamber being an elected chamber coming from the entire membership, which will also be elected by the General Assembly. And also there is suggestion about the establishment of an international anti-corruption court. So these are all suggestions which will be forwarded to the United Nations with a view to reform the United Nations. There is also in a resolution that will be coming up with the Chief Justices, the removal of the veto power by the 5 permanent members. You will recall that all resolutions of the General Assembly, where every country is represented, are subject to the approval of the Security Council, unfortunately. And then any member of the Security Council has the right to veto decisions of the Security Council. Just one member. One member can refuse the United Nations to intervene in any war that is taking place in the world. There are calls now to stop the war between Israel and Palestine, but America is vetoing that suggestion. So that is why the war is proceeding. There is war in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia. And Russia wants the war to proceed. So the function of the United Nations to intervene in wars is failing because the 5 permanent members of the Security Council have that veto power. So as I've said, one of the resolutions which has been passed over and over when we meet here in CMS is the calling of the removal of the veto power. So it's an opportunity now to ask questions to the speaker. I think the interpreter will assist us in that regard.
Okay, children, please, can we have a show of hands, those who want to raise question? Okay. Yes, you can raise your hand if you have questions to ask.
Warm greetings to everyone present. Honorable judges, my question is open to both of you. How do you think that the youth should be represented in the United Nations? Is there enough representation for them as they are the face of the future? How do you think that the youth should be represented in United Nations? Is there enough representation for them as they are the face of the future?
I think you can answer the question is how are the youth to be represented in the United Nations? The youth. How should the youth be represented? He is assisting you.
Children, we'll take one question at a time because we have to interpret the question for Honorable Sir.
I will suggest that they forward all the questions, then we will answer them together.
Come forward, those who want to ask questions, and move to one side, please. On one side, please. On the to my left. Yes. Can we have silence?
Ask the questions, and he'll assist you to translate the question to Portuguese, and then answer all the questions at the same time.
So, students, you just heard Justice Maipala. Justice Maipala talked to you about United Nations not able to control wars, right? So my question to you is, what is United Nations? Once you see United Nations, do you see it as a building in New York, headquartered, or do you see it as various agencies which work for it? Or what is United Nations? Anyone would like to answer that question? Well, I'll tell you, United Nations is a treaty. Have you heard about the United Nations Charter? Right? So once the United Nations was formed, as Honorable Chairperson said, that it has 5 veto powers. So the 4 veto powers, that is the UK, the USA, France, right? And of course Russia. They agreed, and India was also offered a position in veto power, but Pandit Nehru wanted a non-aligned policy. Later on, China took over that position. And since then, China has continued, and it has always vetoed that India should not become a permanent part of the Security Council. Now, how many members does the Security Council have? 5? There are 15. 5 are permanent, rest of them, they continue to rotate every year. Last year, India was the president of the Security Council. And one of your own alumnus, Mr. Prakash Gupta, who was also here yesterday and day before yesterday, he represented India at 2 occasions, and one was that on the India's comment on Sudan. So coming back to the original proposal, that how can we have the veto power system removed? Is it possible to remove the veto powers? And it's a catch-22 situation, right? Just as you want to enter a building, and it's a government building, you cannot enter until you have got a pass. Somebody calls you from inside. But in order to get a pass, you need to know somebody from inside, isn't it? So such a situation always exists. And in the UN system, if you have 2/3 majority of the General Assembly saying that we should call a meeting to reform the United Nations, and even if that proposal goes to the Security Council, and if just one of the veto powers says that no, it's not to be done, then the entire proposal gets wiped away. That's why it's very important that we create a system which is parallel or bigger than the United Nations system, right? You know, there was a car which Henry Ford got invented, the Ford motor car, and if it were to exist in 1945, driven by, less than horsepower that we have now, will you drive the 1945 car in 2023? No? So similarly, it is with the United Nations. I mean, at that time, they just had to end war, and you will be surprised to know that before 1945, war was legal. Can you imagine? War was legal because there was a law that any country which has to expand its borders can just go on and raid other country. It was only in the 1948s when we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights coming up. Human dignity was respected, human rights were respected, and war was made illegal by international law. Even to curb the present war that Russia has waged upon Ukraine, or Israel is waging upon Hamas or the Gaza Strip, you have to have, if United Nations were supposed to intervene, it can only use its peacekeeping forces, right? And only to an extent. Firstly, they'll send a warning, then they'll send a delegation, and when once all of that fails, then they'll ask the peacekeeping forces, and it's up to the peacekeeping forces whether they want to support one side or the other. So there is no arbitration when it comes to war. So do you think that this system is legal and just? War itself is illegal, but to curb the war also, you have to have certain stages. And then UN can use the means of force, and for that also the UN Charter describes in what ways the force can be used. So now we have the questions. Yes. So yeah, for the UN, for the youth. Yes. The youth. So they basically want, how can they reach the United Nations?
How can youth be represented in the United Nations?
Can also give him the question in his language?
In his language.
Yes.
Not given as yet.
I believe that with socialization and education. Socialization in the triple of the United Nations. Socialization. Socialization is the basis of education. And it is the rights of the children, exactly the right of the children, because socialization is not protection. Socialization is relations between you and nations, your nations, United Nations, other nations. Your perspective about the nations, perspective about the justice according to priority of the justice. Children of rights. No protection. Protection is a responsibility of the maternal and paternal. It's responsibility of the father and mother. In reality, protection is care. Okay? Protection is care. Liberty is relations. Huh? And the Lord's relations with the United Nations is possible between the socialization and education. Okay?
Thank you, sir. The next question, what do you think is the most important change required in the UN Charter and why?
Qual você acha que é a mudança mais importante e necessária nas Nações Unidas e por quê?
I believe the most important change in the United Nations is the Security Council. But not only in the number of participants of the Security Council, but the actions of the mediation to the Security Council, military mediation of the Security Council with the other military agents of nations. Because the function of the United Nations is unity, is security of the world, not of the Brazil, not of the India, not of the United States, not of OTAN. Is security and peace in the world. So you need the ordering in the military system. This ordering is the mediating this ordering is the responsibility of the Security Council. Of course, of my point of view. Okay?
Thank you, sir. The next question is if the United Nations fail, like the League of the Nations, what do you do next?
Well, I don't represent the nations, United Nations, okay? I only have people with you. My actions for United Nations is promoting the males, is promote the idea of the ordering of the military order, the social ordering, and the educational ordering, and language ordering. You have many languages. Language is the base of your interpretations of the communication. But this interpretation is not regular when you talk with many languages. So, ordering of language needs língua franca, mediating other language. Okay? So, United Nations and the League of Nations have the same functions. The League of Nations is more is finished because don't have a power for justify. United Nations have the power for justify the power is the nations that the Second World War, the principal authorities is the United Nations, the Council, the Security Council. These authorities have this responsibility of the maintains the United Nations. For this, don't can attend to political interests. He need attend to cultural interests of the earth, of the all nations, and the principal interest now in these moments is peace, security, with the compromise of the not having other war with nuclear war. Okay?
Thank you. The third question.
Do you think that the... Okay, sir. Do you think... The next question, do you think that the voting system should be changed and emphasis should be given to the population and GDP of a country? Emphasis should be given on the population and GDP of a country.
May I know who asked this question, please? Yeah. So, do you want the voting system to be replaced vis-a-vis the GDP? So, how can the economy of a country decide about democracy? I mean, what specifically do you want to know? Can you please elaborate? Because it's not quite clear. Thank you.
I want to ask that the voting system should be changed and emphasis should be given to the population and GDP of a country, because nowadays there is a veto power.
Representation, I think so. Instead of one vote, yes, I believe that it should be decided on. What she's trying to suggest is it could be decided on the population and the economy of the country. He's translating it for sir. He's typing it.
What is India's GDP, by the way, at present? Anybody has any idea? Yes, please.
Come on.
6.1? No, it's less than 4. What is it exactly? 3 point? Yeah, quite close. It's 3.7. Very good.
Você acha que em vez de sistema de voto na ONU, deveríamos considerar o PIB e a população do país?
Okay, children, sirs. About to reply to the question raised.
The big power of in this moment in the earth is representative, heavy representation of the Council of United Nations. So the problem is not economic. The problem is cultural. security in these historical moments is not military only. Security is cultural unity. Security is cultural identity, equalitarian identity. Because the violence is in the country. For many, many millions of years, violence is in the country. Brazil country, India country, China, United Nations, is in the country, is in the terrorism, is in the perception, emotional perception of you about the relations. The base of the violence is the medo. What is medo? Is the dominion and horror. You understand? Horror? No? Portuguese, English.
The question,
Medo.
the question is the voting system.
Okay. Medo, fear. The base of the violence is fear. You don't know about you. You are a people that have many, many, many personalities. You was children, you was youth, you was anxious, you was many cycle of life. All you don't know. How many years you have in the earth? 1, 10, 5 is for each one is more.
I think the question is the voting system at the General Assembly. How should be the voting system?
How?
Should it be one country, one vote?
It is this one.
No, in Portuguese, please.
Portuguese. Shishir. Can we call Shishir inside, please? In Portuguese, he wanted.
Okay.
I think it's just amazing how Sir is trying, in spite of the language barrier, to convey his message to you all. I think it's just amazing. Yes?
I would like to clarify for you, but it's difficult to me. But my entendement is that the United Nations needs a cultural organization. United Nations need a cultural organization, not only economic organization. PIB.
I think we should move to the next question. This question, please. And you can read.
Yeah.
Well, what is the next question?
This is the final question which we are taking.
For weapons of mass destruction.
Do you think that the weapons of mass destruction should be taken from countries and destroyed or handed over to the UN? This is the final question for this session.
Oh, well, United Nations don't have power for substitute the nuclear arms for war of destruction, because this is property, as I believe, properties of the nations and of the markets. Cultural organization is responsible for the change of the actions of the governments and of the representative power of the United Nations. Because the United Nations in these moments, in these exact moments, is divided. You have United Nations, China, United Nations, and political interface between is complex. Okay, the unity is in caminho.
Let me just summarize.
Yes, sir.
Let's thank our presenter. I think the main problem is the language barrier, but let's clap hands for our presenter. I'll make a few comments. There was a question relating to what happens if the United Nations fails. Well, as I've mentioned before, that all decisions of the United Nations, whether the General Assembly or the Security Council, have to be approved by the Security Council, all decisions of the United Nations. If one member of the Security Council vetoes that resolution dies a natural death. So whether you are talking of military intervention, whether you want to send a UN peacekeeping force to a country, whether you want to stop war in Ukraine or Gaza and Israel, all the members of the Security Council have to agree to that resolution. And if one of the members of the Security Council doesn't agree, that resolution will have to die a natural death. And lastly, the current voting system within the General Assembly is one country, one vote. As I've mentioned, there are certain suggestions that are being sent to the General Assembly for approval relating to the voting system, but currently each country has one vote, and all countries who are member states are represented at the General Assembly. Now you have those countries that are elected into the Security Council, but you have 5 permanent members in the Security Council, and those members have got veto power. That's what makes the United Nations not work efficiently because of the veto power. The last question was whether is it possible to take the weapons of mass destructions from the powerful countries and have them destroyed. It's not possible because the 5 permanent members of the Security Council have veto power. That would mean that all of them would agree, which is not possible. They have spent a lot of money developing the weapons of mass destruction, and they would love to keep it because it is a source of power. So it's not possible to take weapons of mass destruction and destroy them. Thank you very much. That's the end of our session.
Sir, Mr. Shishir is seeking permission to add something. Can he?
You can add something.
With due respect to the Honorable Chair and Mr. Divino, I would just like to apprise you that at the ground level, once it comes to working at the grassroots, there are several NGOs and they have formed coalitions. For example, there was a time when there were a lot of landmines. You know what landmines are, right? So there were landmines, and this is about a Nobel Peace Laureate, a true story, whom I recently met in California. His name is Jerry White. He's now 63, but when he was 11-year-old, he was walking, and he was actually playing in Israel. His father was a diplomat posted there from US, and while playing football, all of a sudden he hears a voice boom, and the very next second he realizes that his leg is gone because there was a landmine there, and with that he lost his leg. And then he campaigned, and that campaign became a serious campaign to ban landmines. It became international campaign to ban landmines, and he and Jody Williams got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997 for the same campaign. He still does not have one leg. He is living on a artificial leg. So having said that, there's another campaign, similar campaign going on. It is known as, if you can Google, it's known as Global Zero, which is, suppose there are more than 20,000 nuclear warheads, active warheads, right, weapons of mass destruction. So gradually there is a commitment from the parliamentarians against nuclear disarmament, parliamentarians for nuclear disarmament, and they are gathering support. This is an organization which is run by a laureate of the Right Livelihood Award. It's a $1 million award. His name is Mr. Alan Weir. He's based out of Czech Republic right now in Prague, and he's originally a New Zealander. And the aim of Global Zero is to reduce the total number of nuclear weapons to zero. And the way to do is that, suppose there was a mad race. You know what is a mad race? MAD, mutually assured destruction. So there was during the Cold War period in the 1990s, till the 1990s rather, Russia and US were constantly competing against each other to raise the number of nuclear warheads. And that also gave the competition to other nations to build on their own nuclear weapons, so much so that today even Iran has a nuclear weapon, North Korea has a nuclear weapon, leave aside India and Pakistan. So it's like this, that suppose there are two neighbors, and you come to know that your neighbor has got a pistol, right? So today you might not have a pistol, but then next day you will say, okay, I would also like to keep a pistol because the neighbor might fire at me. So similarly, this mad race went up. Now there is another campaign with these parliamentarians and lawyers that they want to reduce it. So this campaign is a grassroots level campaign, and they are quite successful in convincing the parliamentarians which make the law. So gradually you might find it happening, and their first target is to reduce it to zero by 2030, which is a bit ambitious target, but let's hope and pray that it is done. So even if it is not done at the United Nations level, there are NGOs that are campaigning for it. And hopefully, and there is one person in this conference, today he's not here, he was here until yesterday, he's from Germany, but he's a global citizen. It is known as the democracy without borders. So he's campaigning for a UN Parliamentary Assembly. That means let the UN structure remain as it is, one country, one vote, but in parallel to that, and in parallel to the General Assembly, there should be another constituency, that is UNPA, wherein countries with populations like China and India, likewise, and with the GDP thing, we should have a higher vote stake at the UNPA. So in our own lifetimes, in the next 20-25 years, maybe 10 years down the line, as and when the climate emergency comes up, another pandemic comes up, or God forbids one or two conflicts like the recent Middle East crisis, if they break up, you are sure to see some structural reforms. And 2024 is going to be a very important year, because the UN Summit of the Future is going to take place, which is going to shake and also awaken the consciousness of the entire 8+ billion population of humanity, because even Antonio Guterres, who is the UN Secretary General, he is also very fed up with the kind of things which UN cannot control. So thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you very much.
So would you like to add some thoughts?
He will have to leave his paper for distribution. The paper is written in English.
Oh, okay. He has come for the last 18th year in a row. This is Mr. Divino's 18th visit to this conference, and
Incredible, isn't it? So with this, we come to the end of the session. I'd like to thank the eminent panelists for their inputs and keeping the audience so engaged and focused. Thank you, children, for raising such good questions. And thank you to Mr. Shishir for the support that he offered and his inputs as well. Thank you. That we end the session. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.